To complete these exercises, you're going to give the necessary dimensions needed for each of these objects. So these are completely separate from each other. They're just on one page. So you're going to dimension this and this. This is not a right side view of this object, and this is not a left side view of that object. All right, so I don't have depth. I have heights and I have widths. So thinking about your dimension rules, the necessary dimensions needed, the first one required are the overall dimensions. So what is the height of this object and what is the overall width of this object? Secondly, you have to think about what are the size dimensions and the location dimensions. So I have the size of this notch here to consider as well, but that's going to be smaller than the overall. So when thinking about the order of dimensions, I'm going to try to simplify this as best I can. We're going to be using standard inches, so find your 16th side of your ruler, and you want to dimension in the view that best describes it, so we only have one view, and you want to place the dimensions nearest those features. So the feature is this little cutout of this rectangle, so I'm going to place my width dimensions at the top of this object, because then I can say the overall and the width of this little cutout. Now, I know I'm going to have two dimensions horizontally, and I have to consider the spacing. So remember, the first dimension off of this is going to be the size dimension, and it has to be 3/8 away from the actual object. So I'm going to measure out 3/8. This is 16ths, so you're really looking for 6/16. Then I know the second dimension is going to be 1/4 of the inch after that. So what I'm doing is I'm just laying out the spacing of my dimensions. So 1/4 after that. So you can see my little tick marks. Now I actually need to measure what this thing measures to be. All right, I will give you permission to round up to a 32nd of an inch. This dimension is falling right between a 16th and 1.5. So I'm going to say it's 1.5. And then the overall dimension is pretty close to 2.5. It's technically 2 7/16. I'm going to give you permission to round to that 2.5. So when placing my extensions, I'm going to extend off of my first reference, which is right here, and it should be a 16th away. And it should go beyond the last dimension about an 1/8. So you can see the little space here and how it goes beyond that last one. Now, if you don't know where it's going to be, like on this side, I'm going to extend up, and I can erase that later. So the next step is to actually start placing my dimensions. I am missing an extension line because the first dimension I give is going to be the size of this piece right here. I'm going to extend up a little bit beyond what I actually need. I'll come back and erase that. So this, again, is 1.5. So what I'm going to do, draw 2 arrows. Then I'm going to take off the little bit of extra extension I have. And come to the next one. And I'm going to make sure my gap in my dimension line is offset from the previous one, so it's easier to read. I can actually just place it inside this gap. So the lines I just drew will be the actual dimension line, the one with the arrows. For the arrows, I'm going to wait till the end to draw those, but you are going to need your lettering stencil out quite a bit for these. So I'm going to be using the numbers. Make sure your graphite holder is nice and sharp. And I'll place that first number in here. So line up your T-square. So that way you can slide this back and forth. I'm just going to say 1. Slide this over. Leave a space for your decimal. 1.5. The next one is going to be 2. And for arrows, they should be 3 times longer than they are tall, meaning if you're drawing an arrowhead, this width here is 3, the height of the arrow is 1. All right, so 3 times longer than they are tall. To make this more simple, we're just going to use the A in our lettering stencil. So I'm just going to line up my A right on the end of my dimension line, and it shouldn't cross your extension. The tip of it should just touch your extension line. Like so. So I have my overall and my location dimension. The size is given because I can just take 1.5 and subtract it from 2. I've got my decimal here. That reads 15 right now. All right, so now let's do the same thing for the height. I know I'm going to have 2 dimensions. So again, the first dimension is 3/8 away from the part. 1, 2, 3. The next consecutive one is 1/4. So I'm going to extend out the object. Now right here, I need to reference the top of this object. The rule states that you can't intersect dimension lines, so I shouldn't ever have an extension line cross this arrow, which is a dimension line, but I can intersect extension lines with extension lines. So you can see right there, 2 extension lines cross. That's perfectly fine. So the height of this part is 2.5, and the overall is 4. So now I can place the actual dimension lines. Be aware of where you place your numbers so it's not going to intersect your extension lines. Last thing, shorten any extension lines that go way beyond. They should only stick beyond the last dimension, 6 or an 18th. I'm just shortening those up, and that one's done. For the second one, it's going to be very similar. So the heights, I have 2 heights. These are perfectly aligned, so I can get away with just 2. However, I have 3 different widths that I'm going to have to reference. So let's start by extending off the bottom. And now I'm going to place my spacing. I didn't quite extend enough for these. I'm going to quickly do that. I'm going to save the number and the arrowheads for later. I'm going to extend up. This is going to be my datum because I'm referencing the side. And extend up further than what I know I need. I can make this really long. I'll just have to erase it later. And then this is going to be the first width dimension. I know it has to be at least 3/8. And then this one. And then lastly, the overall. So now I can map out the spacing for my width dimensions. So let me clarify something one more time. You don't want to start your dimensioning inside this view. So think of this as like a force shield around your object. The force shield comes straight out to the overall dimensions and it pushes all the dimensions out 3/8. So my first dimension is 3/8 off the top, not off of what it's actually referencing. That first one is going to be up here, 1, 2, 3. Next one's 1/4. Next one's 1/4. So if you have a small space like this, refer back to the first video. I can point my arrows in and put the number on the inside. If I can't fit the arrows pointing out, I can point them in at what I'm referring to and and that's the number right inside there. Next dimension. And then last. Before I draw that one, I'm going to just shorten my extension line because it's going to get in the way. I'd rather shorten it now so I don't have to fix my dimension line. So you can see I'm staggering my spaces for my numbers. And now I'm ready to actually measure. This is 0.5. Now I'm using baseline dimensioning. Remember, I'm referring to one edge. So I'm not doing chain dimensioning where I would take this measurement, then shift my ruler, take this measurement, then shift my ruler. I'm leaving my zero of my ruler on one side. That side is your reference side, which is known as your datum. That is your absolute zero. So instead of taking this measurement, I'm going to take it from here, which is 1.5. And then my overall, which is 2. Let's go ahead and do these. Should be the exact same as the other side. 2.5 and 4. Remember, you're not going to turn this ever. That would be unidirectional. We are doing align dimensioning, meaning the number should never turn to the side. All right, it should always stay this direction. So I'm going to say 2.5. And for the 0.5, I'm pointing in. Make sure your arrows are pointing to the extension line that you're referencing, the correct edge of your object. Erase any extra extension lines. Just want to stick past 1/8 of an inch, past your last dimension. Now you're ready to move on.